My parents gave my pumped breast milk to my sister's puppy while my baby cried from hunger. The puppy needs nutrients, Mom said. Formula exists, stop being selfish. My baby was hospitalized. They had no idea what was coming next. The freezer was empty. I stood there at 2 a.m., my engorged breasts aching, feeling like my world had just collapsed around me. The basement was cold and damp, with that persistent musty smell that had become the backdrop to my new reality as a single mother. Water stains decorated the ceiling like abstract art, and I could hear mice scurrying behind the walls. This was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet after Ryan's death. That was 8 months ago. The silence in the house felt oppressive, broken only by Amelia's increasingly desperate cries from upstairs. I had developed a routine over these past weeks: wake up every 3 hours, pump milk while my daughter slept, label and store each precious bag with the care of someone handling liquid gold. Because that's what it was to us. Liquid gold that represented hours of my life, my body's work, my daughter's sustenance, and my only way to provide for her when everything else felt impossible. I remember the first time I had to pump at work, hiding in a supply closet because my employer claimed they didn't have a proper lactation room. The humiliation of explaining to my male supervisor why I needed these breaks, the way his face contorted with disgust as if my basic biological functions were somehow offensive to him. But I persevered because Amelia needed me too. Every drop mattered when you're living on a single income that barely covers the basics. My 3-month-old daughter, Amelia, crying in her bassinet, staring at the space where 40 ounces of pumped breast milk should have been. Her cries weren't just hungry, they were the desperate wails of a baby who had been on a predictable feeding schedule and suddenly found herself abandoned by the very people who should have protected her most basic needs. 40 ounces? I painstakingly collected over 2 weeks, pumping every 3 hours while working from home, storing each precious bag labeled with dates and times. Each bag represented a small victory in my struggle to maintain some semblance of control over our chaotic life. Amelia, 2 ounces, 3:15 to 6 a.m. written in my careful handwriting, as if the precision of my labeling could somehow bring order to the chaos that had become our existence. Those bags weren't just milk, they were security, peace of mind, insurance against exactly this kind of emergency. They represented countless nights of interrupted sleep, the sharp pain of engorgement when my body produced more than Amelia could consume directly, the careful balancing act of maintaining my supply while working to support us both. They were the physical manifestation of my love, my sacrifice, my determination to give my daughter the best start in life despite our circumstances. I had calculated everything so carefully. The pediatrician had explained that breast milk could be stored safely for up to 6 months in a deep freezer, and I had been building our emergency stash methodically. Some days when Amelia slept longer than usual, I would pump extra. Some nights when my anxiety about our future kept me awake, I would pump instead of lying there worrying. It became a meditation of sorts, the rhythmic sound of the pump and the slow accumulation of precious nutrition for my baby. Gone. Mom, I called out, trying to stay calm despite the panic rising in my throat. My voice echoed strangely in the basement, sounding smaller and more desperate than I intended. I had learned to modulate my tone carefully around my parents since moving back home. Too emotional and I was being dramatic. Too flat and I was ungrateful for their help. There was no winning, but tonight desperation overrode my usual caution. Where's Amelia's milk? She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her silk pajamas, the expensive ones Sophia had bought her for Mother's Day last year. Even at 2 a.m., even when woken from sleep, she managed to look put together in a way that made me acutely aware of my own appearance. My hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy bun. My nursing tank top had milk stains that I'd given up trying to remove completely. Dark circles under my eyes told the story of months of interrupted sleep and emotional exhaustion. The contrast between us was stark and intentional. She had made it clear from the day I moved back home that my presence here was temporary charity, not a daughter returning to her childhood home in her hour of greatest need. She looked annoyed at being woken, her face pinched with a particular expression she reserved for inconveniences that disrupted her carefully ordered life. Behind her, I could hear my 24-year-old sister, Sophia, cooing at something in the living room. The sound made my stomach clench because I knew that tone. It was the same saccharine voice she used when filming content for her Instagram account, the practiced sweetness that had somehow convinced 20,000 people to follow her lifestyle advice despite her never having held a job for more than 6 months. Oh, that we used it for Princess Buttercup, Mom said casually as if she hadn't just destroyed 2 weeks of my body's work. The words hit me like a physical blow. She said it with the same tone she might use to mention that she'd used my shampoo or borrowed my car. As if my breast milk was just another household commodity, interchangeable with any other liquid in the refrigerator. You? What? My voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as my own. The words seemed to hang in the air between us, and for a moment I wondered if I had misunderstood. Surely my mother, a woman who had breastfed 2 children herself, couldn't have just told me that she had given my baby's food to a dog. Surely there was some explanation that would make this make sense. Sophia, read that breast milk is great for puppies' immune systems, my mother continued, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. As if the fact that my sister had read something, probably on some mommy blog or wellness Instagram account, was sufficient justification for stealing food from her granddaughter. Princess Buttercup has been having tummy troubles, and the vet bills are astronomical. This was a natural solution. Natural solution. The phrase echoed in my head as I tried to process what she was saying. My baby's specially crafted nutrition, pumped from my own body at great personal cost and discomfort, was being described as a natural solution for my sister's designer dog's digestive issues. The same dog that ate premium organic kibble that cost more per month than I spent on groceries for myself. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made to build up that milk supply. The extra calories I forced myself to eat even when I had no appetite, because I knew my body needed fuel to produce milk. The gallon of water I drank every day, setting reminders on my phone so I wouldn't forget. The way I had to avoid alcohol completely, not even able to have a glass of wine to take the edge off my grief and stress. The medications I couldn't take for my postpartum depression because they weren't compatible with breastfeeding. All of that sacrifice, all of that careful attention to my body's needs so that I could provide for my daughter, and they had poured it into a bowl for a dog. I couldn't breathe. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. My chest tightened and I could feel that familiar sensation of panic rising up from my stomach. This was what a breakdown felt like, I realized dimly. This was the moment when the careful control I had maintained since Ryan's death finally cracked and shattered. Princess Buttercup was Sophia's new teacup Yorkie, a $3,000 impulse purchase she made last month after seeing a similar dog on a celebrity's social media. The irony wasn't lost on me that this dog had cost more than I made in 2 months at my work-from-home customer service job, and yet somehow my family had convinced themselves that I was the financial burden in this household. A dog that wore designer clothes and had its own Instagram account with 20,000 followers. Sophia had spent more on the dog's wardrobe than I had been able to spend on maternity clothes during my entire pregnancy. The dog had a custom-built bed that cost $500, a collection of sweaters for different seasons, and a weekly grooming appointment that cost more than my grocery budget. The Instagram account at Princess Buttercup Living had become Sophia's full-time obsession. She spent hours staging photo shoots around the house, turning every room into a backdrop for content about luxury pet lifestyle and treating your fur baby like royalty. She had quit her part-time job at a boutique 3 months ago, claiming that her influencer income was sufficient to support her lifestyle. What she hadn't mentioned was that our parents were supplementing that income substantially. I had watched with growing resentment as the dog received the kind of attention and care that my daughter was denied. When Princess Buttercup had a minor stomach upset last week, Sophia had rushed her to an emergency vet and spent $800 on tests and treatments. When Amelia had a fever and I couldn't afford the co-pay for an urgent care visit, my mother had suggested I wait it out and give her Tylenol. The double standard was impossible to ignore, but every time I brought it up, I was accused of being jealous or dramatic. It's different, my mother would say. Dogs can't tell you what's wrong with them. As if my 3-month-old daughter was somehow more capable of articulating her needs than a pampered teacup Yorkie. That was Amelia's food, I shouted, no longer caring about waking anyone. My voice cracked on the words, and I could hear the desperation bleeding through my attempt at anger. This wasn't just about the milk anymore, it was about everything. It was about being treated as a second-class citizen in my own family's home. It was about watching a dog receive better care than my daughter. It was about being gaslit into believing that my needs and my baby's needs were somehow less important than maintaining peace and supporting Sophia's latest venture. My baby's food. Dad wandered in, scratching his belly, wearing the same ratty t-shirt he'd been sleeping in for the past week. His hair was sticking up at odd angles and he had that confused, irritated expression of someone who had been woken up by a noise and wasn't happy about it. He looked between my mother and me, clearly trying to piece together what was happening but not really caring enough to pay close attention. What's all the noise? His voice carried that edge of annoyance that I had become so familiar with since moving back home. Everything I did seemed to annoy him, Amelia's crying, my late-night pumping sessions, the smell of formula when I had to supplement. He had made it clear that our presence was disrupting the peaceful retirement he had envisioned. They gave my breast milk to Sophia's dog, I said, my voice hollow now. The fight was draining out of me as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to settle into my very soul. I had reached that point of emotional overload where everything starts to feel surreal, like you're watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. He shrugged. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, that it took my breath away. This was his granddaughter we were talking about. This was his daughter standing in front of him, clearly in distress, explaining that her baby's food had been given to a dog. And he shrugged. The puppy needs nutrients? Formula exists. Jasmine, stop being selfish. Selfish? The word hit me like a slap. I was selfish for wanting to feed my human baby instead of my sister's vanity pet. I was selfish for expecting my family to understand the difference between a child and a dog. I was selfish for thinking that my daughter's needs might take priority over Sophia's Instagram content creation. This wasn't the first time they had accused me of being selfish since moving back home. I was selfish for taking up space in their house. Selfish for asking them to help with Amelia occasionally so I could work. Selfish for not being grateful enough for their generosity in letting us stay. Selfish for grieving my husband's death in a way that made them uncomfortable. But this felt different. This felt like a final nail in the coffin of any hope I had maintained that my family might actually care about my daughter and me. This was the moment I realized that we truly were on our own, even while living under my parents' roof. Formula is expensive, I said through gritted teeth, trying to explain something that should have been obvious to anyone with a functioning brain. And Amelia doesn't tolerate it well. She's been exclusively breastfed. The truth was more complicated than that. Formula wasn't just expensive, it was a luxury I could barely afford on my limited income. A single can of the hypoallergenic formula that Amelia could tolerate cost nearly $40 and lasted maybe 3 days. That was almost $400 a month just for formula, not counting bottles, sterilizing equipment, and all the other supplies needed for bottle feeding. But beyond the financial burden, there was the emotional cost. I had committed to breastfeeding not just because it was healthier for Amelia, but because it was one of the few ways I could provide for her that didn't require money I didn't have. In a world where I felt powerless and dependent, breastfeeding was something that was uniquely mine, something I could give my daughter that no one else could. The few times I had given Amelia formula, the results had been disastrous. She would drink it reluctantly, her tiny face scrunched up in distaste, and then spend the next several hours in obvious discomfort. Her stomach would become distended and hard, and she would cry the particular cry of a baby in pain, not hungry crying or tired crying, but the desperate wail of genuine distress. Then make more milk, Mom interrupted, as if I were a cow that could simply be turned on and off at will. It's free from your body. Right? Just pump again. The ignorance behind her words was staggering. This was a woman who had breastfed 2 children herself, who should have understood the basic biology of milk production. But somehow, in her determination to defend Sophia's actions, she had convinced herself that breast milk was an unlimited resource that I was hoarding out of spite. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. I thought about trying to explain to her how milk production actually worked, how it was based on supply and demand, how stress could impact letdown, how it took time to rebuild a depleted supply. I thought about explaining that the bags of frozen milk represented hours and days of careful planning and timing, not something that could be instantly replaced. But they'd never understood. They had never understood anything about my situation since Ryan died. They didn't understand grief, they didn't understand single motherhood, they didn't understand financial stress, and they certainly didn't understand the complex biology of breastfeeding. When I moved back home after my husband, Ryan, died in a car accident when I was 7 months pregnant, they treated my grief and my baby as inconveniences. The move itself had been traumatic, packing up the life Ryan and I had built together, selling most of our furniture because there was no room for it in my parents' house, leaving the nursery we had so carefully prepared for our daughter. I remember the day I had to dismantle Amelia's crib, the one Ryan had spent weeks researching and comparing before finally choosing the perfect one. He had been so excited about putting it together, so proud when he finished it and stepped back to admire his work. Our daughter is going to sleep like a princess, he had said, not knowing that he would never see her use it. My parents had made it clear from the beginning that this arrangement was temporary and contingent on my good behavior. I was expected to be grateful, quiet, and unobtrusive. Amelia was expected to somehow not be a baby, not cry at night, not require attention during the day, not disrupt the peaceful retirement lifestyle my parents had planned. It had been 5 months since Ryan's death, 2 months of finishing my pregnancy alone, and 3 months of navigating new motherhood while grieving and living in my childhood home. Sophia's dog got a nursery renovation. Within a week of Princess Buttercup's arrival, my parents had converted their guest room into what Sophia called a puppy palace. They installed custom shelving for the dog's extensive wardrobe, bought a small chandelier because Sophia said it would look good in photos, and even had special flooring installed that would be easier to clean if the dog had accidents. My daughter and I got the moldy basement. The same basement that had flooded twice in the past 5 years, leaving permanent water damage and a persistent smell that no amount of cleaning could eliminate. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck in some places, and the single window was at ground level, letting in barely any natural light. There was no heat down there, just a space heater that made the electricity bill spike whenever I used it. The walls were concrete block, painted white in what I suspected was an attempt to make the space seem less dungeon-like, but only succeeding in giving it the ambience of a mental institution. I had tried to make it as comfortable as possible for Amelia and myself, buying cheerful blankets and hanging pictures on the walls. But there was no disguising the fact that my parents' dog was living in luxury while their granddaughter was relegated to the basement like some shameful secret. Amelia's cries escalated, pulling me back to the immediate crisis. She was hungry, and her cries were becoming more desperate and panicked. I could hear the difference, this wasn't her tired cry or her something's wrong cry. This was the primal wail of a baby whose basic needs weren't being met, and the sound cut through me like a knife. My breasts were ready to feed her, engorged and aching from the missed feeding. But she'd been having latch issues since birth, which is why I had started pumping in the first place. Some babies take to breastfeeding naturally, but Amelia had struggled from the beginning. She would latch on for a few seconds, then pull away in frustration, crying harder each time. The lactation consultant at the hospital had assured me that this was normal, that some babies needed more time to learn. She had shown me different positions to try, different techniques to encourage proper latching, but those consultations cost money I didn't have, and without insurance coverage for extended lactation support, I had been largely on my own to figure it out. The frozen stash was supposed to be our backup, our security. It was my insurance policy against exactly this kind of situation, times when direct breastfeeding wasn't working, when I was too stressed to produce enough milk immediately, when we needed the reliability of measured, controlled feedings. I had calculated everything so carefully. If I could pump enough to build up a reserve supply, I could buy us time to work on Amelia's latching issues without worrying about her nutrition. I could have some flexibility in my schedule, maybe even get a full night's sleep occasionally while Ryan's mother bottle fed Amelia with pumped milk during visits. I rushed to feed her directly, but she struggled, crying harder. The stress of the situation was making everything worse. I was tense and upset, my heart racing with anger and panic, and babies can sense that kind of emotional turmoil. My letdown reflex was affected by my stress levels, making it even harder for her to get the milk she needed. She latched and unlatched repeatedly, getting more frustrated and more hungry with each failed attempt. Her little hands flailed as she turned her head back and forth, rooting desperately but unable to coordinate the complex series of movements required for successful breastfeeding. Each time she pulled away, she would cry harder, and her distress would feed my own anxiety, creating a vicious cycle that made success even less likely. Sophia appeared in the doorway, cradling her puppy like a baby, swaying gently back and forth in a mockery of maternal behavior. She was wearing silk pajamas that matched our mother's, a gift from our parents' last anniversary trip to Europe. Her hair was perfectly styled even though she had supposedly been asleep, and her makeup was flawless in that Instagram-ready way that somehow required 2 hours of natural preparation. "Princess Buttercup is doing so much better after her breast milk bottle," she said with the satisfied tone of someone who had accomplished something wonderful. "Her coat is shinier already, and look how content she is." The dog did look content, nestled in Sophia's arms like an infant, its tiny pink tongue lolling out slightly as it dozed. It was wearing a tiny silk pajama set that matched Sophia's, custom-made by a designer who specialized in luxury pet wear. The sight of this pampered animal wearing better clothes than my daughter had ever owned while being fed nutrition meant for a human baby made my vision blur with rage. I thought about all the photos Sophia had posted over the past few hours while I was trying to sleep. Photos of Princess Buttercup looking refreshed and glowing after her special organic nutrition boost. Photos of Sophia preparing the all-natural puppy wellness drink with captions about holistic pet care and giving your fur baby the best life possible. Her followers had loved it. Hundreds of comments praising her dedication to her pet's health, asking for more details about this innovative feeding method, sharing their own stories of expensive vet bills and difficult-to-solve pet health issues. Sophia had basked in the attention, responding to comments with detailed explanations of how breast milk was nature's perfect nutrition and how she had discovered this amazing solution to digestive problems. What she hadn't mentioned in any of those posts was that the breast milk wasn't hers. She hadn't mentioned that it had been stolen from a freezer where it was being stored for a human infant. She hadn't mentioned that her amazing discovery had left her 3-month-old niece without food. I wanted to scream. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not only had they taken Amelia's food, but Sophia had turned it into content, monetizing my daughter's hunger for Instagram engagement. She had built her entire brand around the illusion of luxury and caring, and somehow stealing from a baby fit perfectly into that narrative. Instead, I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking with a combination of adrenaline and exhaustion. The car Ryan and I had bought together 2 years ago, back when we were planning for a future that would never come. It needed new tires and the air conditioning didn't work, but it was paid off and it ran, which made it one of the few reliable things left in my life. The drive to the 24-hour pharmacy was a blur of streetlights and empty roads. It was 3 a.m. now, and the city felt like a ghost town. I kept thinking about Ryan, wondering what he would have done in this situation. He had always been the one to handle conflict with my family, smoothly deflecting their passive-aggressive comments and creating boundaries that protected our relationship. "Your family loves you," he used to say, "but they have a funny way of showing it sometimes." He had a gift for seeing the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. I wondered if he would have been able to find some way to make this situation make sense, some way to preserve family relationships while still protecting Amelia. But Ryan wasn't here, and I was learning that my family's love came with conditions that I was no longer willing to accept. The 24-hour pharmacy had 1 can of the special formula Amelia could tolerate, sitting lonely on a shelf that usually held a dozen different varieties. The hypoallergenic formula, the kind specifically designed for babies with sensitive stomachs and digestive issues. The kind that cost almost 3 times as much as regular formula and was always in short supply because so few stores bothered to stock it. One can, $38.47 with tax. The cashier, a tired-looking woman probably working her second job to make ends meet, didn't make eye contact as she rang up my purchase. I wondered if she had children, if she understood the desperation behind buying formula at 3 a.m. I had $43 in my checking account until my work-from-home paycheck cleared in 5 days. The math was simple and brutal. This purchase would leave me with less than $5 to last until payday. No gas money, no grocery money, no emergency fund for any other crisis that might arise. But what choice did I have? My daughter was hungry, and my family had made it clear that her needs were secondary to a dog's digestive comfort. I bought it, my debit card declining twice before finally going through, probably because the bank's fraud detection system couldn't believe someone would buy formula at 3 a.m. unless it was an emergency. Amelia fought the bottle at first. She only had formula twice before, both times resulting in painful gas and projectile vomiting, but she was hungry enough to drink. By 6 a.m., the vomiting started. By 8 a.m., she was lethargic. By 10 a.m., I was in the ER. Severe dehydration, the pediatrician said, looking at me with poorly concealed judgment. What happened to her regular feeding schedule? I explained, my voice hollow. The doctor's expression shifted from judgment to horror. They gave human breast milk to a dog, she repeated slowly. While your infant went hungry. The puppy needed nutrients, I said bitterly, parroting my father's words. Ma'am, this represents serious neglect of an infant's nutritional needs. I'm required to report this to Child Protective Services. Good. Let her report it. I was too tired, too broken to care about family dynamics anymore. Amelia spent 2 days in the pediatric ward, hooked to IVs for hydration. 2 days of me sleeping in a chair, bumping to rebuild my supply. Crying every time I looked at her tiny arm taped with tubes. My parents didn't visit. They were too busy with Sophia's puppy influencer photo shoot. But Sarah visited, my best friend since high school, now a family law attorney. She took one look at the situation and said the words that changed everything. You know, Ryan had life insurance. Right? I did know. A small policy through his work, enough to cover funeral expenses and a few months of bills. What I didn't know was that Ryan had another policy, a big one. One he'd taken out when I got pregnant, naming me as beneficiary. His mother has been trying to contact you, Sarah explained. But your parents kept saying you weren't ready to talk. Jasmine, it's a $250,000 policy. $250,000. I've been living in a moldy basement, rationing formula, begging for basic respect while $250,000 waited for me. There's more, Sarah continued. Ryan's family wants to help. They've been worried sick, but didn't want to overstep since you were with your parents. They have a mother-in-law suite, empty, waiting for you and Amelia. I started sobbing, not sad tears, angry tears, relieved tears. My parents had isolated me, made me believe I had nowhere else to go, no other options, all while treating my daughter as less valuable than a dog. But first, there was something else to handle. See, Princess Buttercup's Instagram account was monetized. Sophia made decent money from sponsored posts. What she didn't know was that what they had done could be considered child endangerment and potentially theft. Taking food specifically intended for an infant and giving it to an animal while that infant went hungry crossed serious legal and ethical lines. And I had evidence, so much evidence. Sophia had posted about Princess Buttercup's special nutrition boost on her stories. She literally filmed herself feeding my breast milk to the dog, bragging about the organic solution to puppy digestive issues. 20,000 followers saw it, including some who recognized the serious nature of what they were witnessing. The knock came while I was still in the hospital with Amelia. Child Protective Services, the police. The investigation was swift. The Instagram videos were evidence of child neglect, prioritizing a pet's perceived needs over an infant's basic nutrition. My parents were charged with child endangerment. Sophia was charged with contributing to the neglect of a minor. But I wasn't done. While they dealt with legal issues, I met with Ryan's parents. The Johnsons were everything. My family wasn't warm, supportive, devastated. They'd been kept from their granddaughter. They prepared the mother-in-law suite months ago, hoping I'd come. We didn't want to pressure you, Ryan's mother, Linda, said through tears. Your parents said you needed space. We thought we were respecting your wishes. I moved out while my parents were at their arraignment, took everything that was mine, which wasn't much. Left a note, formula exists. Find your own roof. The $250,000 life insurance changed everything. I paid off Ryan's medical bills from the accident, set up Amelia's college fund, bought a small house near the Johnsons, close enough for daily grandparent visits, far enough for independence. But the real revenge came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, the pediatrician who treated Amelia, was married to a local news anchor. The story of parents feeding breast milk to a dog while a baby starved, it went viral. Not just local, national. Sophia lost every sponsorship within 48 hours. Turns out, brands don't want to be associated with people who prioritize puppies over babies. Her Instagram was flooded with outraged mothers. She had to make her account private, destroying her influencer career. My parents became pariahs. Mom was asked to leave her book club. Dad's golf buddies suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Their church congregation whispered. The neighborhood association got complaints. They tried to spin it. Posted about how they were just trying to help both babies. The comments section destroyed them. Screenshots of Sophia's videos spread across parenting groups, dog lover forums, and medical professional pages. Everyone was horrified. The legal consequences were severe. They got probation for child endangerment, but the civil suit was what broke them. I sued for the value of the breast milk. Yes. It has monetary value, about $3 per ounce. The medical bills from Amelia's hospitalization and emotional distress. The judgment was $50,000. They had to sell their car to pay it. Sophia had to rehome Princess Buttercup. The court deemed her unfit for animal ownership. The puppy went to a family that promised never to feed it human bodily fluids. Sophia ugly cried through the whole proceeding, but there was more coming. Ryan's employer reached out. There'd been a paperwork delay. Ryan had actually increased his life insurance policy when I got pregnant, but the additional coverage had been held up in processing. The additional $100,000 cleared the same week my parents had to take out a loan against their house to pay for Sophia's mounting legal fees and their own financial obligations. They'd already mortgaged it once to pay for Sophia's various business ventures, all failed influencer schemes. I could have helped them. I had $350,000 total now. I could have covered their legal fees, made it all go away. Instead, when their house eventually went up for sale due to their financial difficulties, I made an offer. Cash. Then I donated it to a nonprofit that provides housing for single mothers escaping difficult situations. Mothers who need a safe place where their baby's food won't be taken for pets. The opening ceremony was beautiful. We converted my old basement room into a playroom for children. The room where Princess Buttercup had her nursery became an actual nursery for human babies. My parents' master bedroom was turned into a lactation support center complete with industrial breast pumps and freezers for milk storage. I named it Amelia's house. My parents had to drive by it every day from their studio apartment to their court-mandated community service, had to see the sign, had to watch other families thrive in the space where they valued a dog over their granddaughter. Sophia works at a pet store now. Not a fancy one. The kind as part of a big box chain. She's not allowed to have social media as part of her probation. Every time someone recognizes her as the breast milk puppy girl, she has to explain, has to relive her humiliation. My parents work too. Mom stocks shelves at a grocery store. Dad does night security. They can't retire. All their savings went to legal fees and failed attempts to salvage their reputation. They sent one letter. 6 months later, not an apology, they still insisted they'd done nothing wrong. Just complaints about how I'd overreacted and ruined their lives over a little milk. I had that letter framed. It hangs in my office at a nonprofit I started with part of the insurance money. An organization that provides free breast pumps, lactation support, and freezer storage for mothers who can't afford them. We've helped hundreds of families. Every time a mother cries with relief because she can feed her baby, I think about that night standing at an empty freezer. My daughter hungry. My parents choosing a dog. They chose a puppy over their granddaughter. So I chose to build something from their cruelty. Chose to ensure no other mother would stand at an empty freezer, desperate and alone. Amelia is 2 now, thriving, meeting every milestone. She calls Linda grandma and spends weekends learning to bake cookies and tend gardens. She's surrounded by love, real love, not the conditional kind that ranks you below a teacup Yorkie. Last week, we were at the park when I saw my mother. She was sitting alone on a bench, aged years and just months, watching families play. She saw us, saw Amelia toddling around, giggling, calling mama as she showed me a dandelion. Our eyes met. For a moment, I saw something that might have been regret, might have been realization of what she'd thrown away for her golden child's whims. Then Amelia tumbled into my arms, and I turned away. We had somewhere to be. The Johnson family's Sunday dinner, where my daughter would be treasured, celebrated, chosen, where her food would never ever go to a dog. They had no idea what was coming next. Neither did I that night at the empty freezer. But desperation and a mother's rage are powerful motivators. They gave my babies food to a puppy. In return, I gave their house to mothers who understood that babies come first. Always. Seems fair to me. The milk was just the beginning. The real loss was the granddaughter they'll never know. The family they demolished for Instagram likes and a dog's shiny coat. Hoped Princess Buttercup was worth it. Spoiler, she wasn't.